Okay, good morning to each one of y'all, and it has been a blessing to be here already, and I just trust that the Lord can. I was just thinking as we were in the Sunday school lesson just how well it kind of ties right into what I would like to speak about, and I didn't really actually even look at what the Sunday school lesson was this morning, just in studying for the message, but it's pretty cool that question of, do we have to know, to be committed, do we have to know what the future is? I think that's really cool. That's going to be some of what I'd like to talk about this morning. But let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll get started. Thank you, Lord, for today, and thank you for this opportunity to be here and worship in your house. God, I pray that you would be with us as we look at these Bible characters that you've shown us. And God, I pray that we can learn some things about just having our identity in you, and pray that we can grow together. Please guide me as I speak. Help me to just say the things that you would like me to. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, so I have a question here, and if someone's ready to answer it, great. If not, think about it. But who are you, and what are you doing here? It's a question that when Joe Mullet was here a few months back, he gave us a little story of a rabbi, I believe it was, he's like, he'd pay a lot of money to have somebody stand at his door and ask him that every morning. Who are you, and what are you doing here? And that's a question I'd like to ask each of you this morning. It's maybe something that we don't think about a whole lot. We can get caught up with life, and we're working or doing our at school, or being a mom, or fill in the blanks, and we just kind of do what's ahead of us, and we don't think about, what is my purpose for being here? Who am I? I know I'm a person, and I know what my name is, but really, who am I? Who does God see me as? It's maybe something we should take a bit of time to think about, and it's a good thing. This whole thing of identifying who we are and having some identity, I guess, because without that, if we just sort of are whatever the cool thing happens to be at the time, we're going to probably be sort of loose and drifting and everything. So it's pretty important. Probably more important than that is, who does God see me as? Who does God say I am? Who does God actually see me as? And so to get into that, I'd like to go to the book of Psalms, and I think our answer is there. Psalms 139. I would like to read that chapter this morning. And this whole identity thing, this is not, obviously there's a lot of, this whole thing with gender identity and are you a dog or are you a cat, or I hope none of us are at that point this morning, but if that's the case, we can hopefully get that straightened out afterwards. But this is more, who does God say that I am? Who does God see me as? So I'd like to read the chapter of Psalm 139, and I'm going to be reading in the New Living Translation. I really like the way it says it, but you can follow along there. And just listen to the way that David talks here, and the way he talks about God. I think it's really, really neat. Verse 1, O Lord, you have examined my heart and know everything about me. You know when I sit down or stand up. You know my thoughts even when I'm far away. You see me when I travel, and when I rest at home. You know everything I do. You know what I'm going to say even before I say it, Lord. You go before me and follow me. You place your hand of blessing on my head. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too great for me to understand. I can never escape from your spirit. I can never get away from your presence. If I go to heaven, you are there. If I go down to the grave, you are there. If I ride the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest oceans, even there your hand will guide me, and your strength will support me. I could ask the darkness to hide me, and the light around me to become night. But even in darkness, I cannot hide from you. To you, the night shines as bright as day. Darkness and light are the same to you. You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous, how well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. How precious are your thoughts about me, O God? They cannot be numbered. I can't even count them. They outnumber the grains of sand. And when I wake up, you are still with me. O God, if only you would destroy the wicked. Get out of my life, you murderers. They blaspheme you. Your enemies misuse your name. O Lord, shouldn't I hate those who hate you? Shouldn't I despise those who oppose you? Yes, I hate them with total hatred. For your enemies are my enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out everything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting life. And I just think that's so cool. David is just talking about how, God knows every thread of his being. God knows us really better than we even do. And I think there's a lot of security in that. But back to this whole thing of our identity, I guess. What are some things that people can identify as? Maybe things that you can put your identity in. What are some of those things? Just think of them, say them out as you think about them.
Our work.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We can pretty well get focused on taking a lot of pride in what we do, and probably some of that's okay. But yeah, you meet people that their work sort of defines them. Okay, what else?
Our families.
What about just like, man, I want to raise the best kids, and sort of be like, yeah, that's what I'm going to devote my life to. It's not bad to raise a godly family, obviously, but what about, the way my kids perform? That's sort of what, if they don't perform well, then my identity's sort of shattered or something. Yeah. All right. What else?
Hobbies.
Yeah. What else? There's a few more I have written down.
There's people who identify with a certain sports team.
A fan of that team or something. Okay. What about relationships? This is my group of friends or the people I hang out with. Maybe that's a bigger thing when you're in school coming up or you're younger. You identify as, this is sort of my group of friends, and they're maybe sort of cool or something, and yeah, you can put some identity in that. Or is there anything else? What about like your, maybe like your ministry? Suppose you sort of have something that you feel God has called you to. What about that? What if you sort of put your identity there? Mom, that's one thing you do is you do a Bible study with some ladies. Could that ever become something like that's an awesome thing? But what if somebody would take that and put their identity in it? And sort of my ministry here is what defines me, or pastor or something. Yeah, there's probably a few other things. I think you get the idea. And I'm not saying that all those things are bad, but is that really something that our identity should be wrapped up in? So I was trying to think of a way to illustrate this a little bit, and it's interesting. Brian, you kind of brought up the thing of I like bow hunting, and there's something about watching an arrow fly that, I don't know, it just kind of does something to me. So I do enjoy bow hunting, but I brought with me a bow here, and this is, we'll go ahead and just string it up. But this is a hickory longbow. I made this a few years back with some help from another guy up when I was at boys camp. And I was trying to think of a way that I'm gonna get, does someone have another songbook maybe? I was thinking I could maybe do something like this and hang it in the front so you can kind of all, yeah, since using it as an object lesson. Let's see if, I think that'll work. Okay. So maybe some of you don't think there's a whole lot special about a hickory bow, but if you've ever made one, you know it's a good bit of work, and it takes some, somebody needs to know kind of what they're doing. And I'll just kind of take a little bit here to tell you the process of making something like this, just for illustration's sake. So basically you need this is made out of the type of hickory is called mockernut hickory. They grew a lot up in the woods up there around camp. And so we went around in the woods and we found a tree 4 to 6 inches in diameter and sort of marked it. Like, we found some that were nice and straight a few months before we were wanting to cut one down, and we're like, these are a couple good trees. And you want to cut them sometime in I think it was maybe April or May, when the sap is kind of flowing through the bark of the tree, or through the inner bark, I guess, because it makes it a lot easier to take the bark off. So we did that. We marked the tree, and then we kind of picked a day and said we're going to go cut it down. So we cut it down, take the bark off, cut it into a 6.5 or 7 foot log. This tree is probably 4 to 6 inches in diameter, I think it was. And so then we kind of split it into 4 sections, and then put it up in an attic for close to a year to dry and get all the moisture out of it so we could start working with it. So then kind of the process of doing that is you look at it's called a stave. It's just a kind of split up piece of wood, 7 feet long or something, and you find the most ideal section, and we had a form kind of thing, like the rough shape of what we wanted it to end up like, and cut it out and made it a lot thicker than what this is now, because you have to start out a lot thicker, obviously, as you start bending it, because if you just cut it in this, this thinness or whatever to start with, it will lose all of its strength when you start stretching and everything. So we did that, and then you can sort of the way that you do this. So this actually, the outside of this limb right here is actually the outer bark, or the inner bark, I should say. So when you peel that layer of bark off, that's what's left right there. So you don't do anything to the outside, but the inside, you have to scrape down. Just basically everything was just shaved off with like a draw knife to make it, you want to make it nice and consistent. And as you're doing this, you stretch it every so often. So basically, we would put it on a hook right in here. We had a pulley system where we would just pull it and just work it and work it and work it. And we would stand back a ways and watch it as the limbs would get stretched, and make sure we would find spots, okay, that's kind of bending a little bit more than the other section, and so we would take a little bit out of that section, and we wanted everything to be bending perfectly, because if one section of the limb is stiffer than the other section, you'll develop a weak point at that, for one side is thicker than the other. So it's a good bit of work. So it takes time, and it takes something else, and I don't know if you could see it later, but with working with this wood, you have to kind of work with the natural grain. Not everything is perfect. So if you actually look down this bow, this side of the limb is twisted this way kind of, this side is twisted the other way, and they actually like twist opposite directions, but then at the tips they kind of come back around. And so that was a bit of a challenge. We had to cut off a little bit of each side to make everything, as you pull the string back, to make it come back perfectly smooth, because you want your arrows to fly straight. So it's a lot of work. It takes some time. So we'll leave that for now, and I want to get into. We'll come back to it. I want to get into the story of Joseph just a little bit, and I just want you to think about the question. So we had something in mind for this bow. What if what if the hickory tree would have had something different in mind for itself than becoming a bow? Let's look at the story of Joseph, and we're not going to obviously have time to read through the whole thing, so I have some references here that I'd like to hand out, and y'all can each have about 5 references here. So if I could have about 5 volunteers. The first one will be Genesis 37, 5 to 11. Somebody can read that.
5 to 11.
Okay, Brian? The next one is Genesis 37, 23 to 28. Someone read that.
23 to 20.
Okay. Genesis 39, 17 to 21.
Genesis 39, 17 to 21.
Okay. We're going to have a fair amount, so be ready to read if you can. Genesis 40, verses 14, 15, and 23.
40.
And I can remind you if you forget. All right, Genesis 41, 39 to 46. There's someone that would do that. Okay. All right, and then Genesis 45, verses 3 to 11.
Genesis 45, 3 to 11.
Okay. And y'all can start reading. Whoever has that first one, go ahead and read 37, 5 to 11.
And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, the dream which I have dreamed. For, behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, the sheep arose and also stood upright. And behold, the sheep stood around about and made obeisance to my sheep. And his brethren said to him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it to his brethren, and he said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and his brethren, and his father rebuked him and said unto him, What is the dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and your brother indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee unto the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the same.
Okay. So that kind of the whole thing of sort of being, he had those dreams, and there was something going on there, but we'll get into that. Let's keep reading. Genesis 37, 23 to 28.
And it came to pass when Joseph was come to his brethren, that they stripped Joseph of his coat of many colors that was on him. And they took it and cast it into a pit. When the pit was empty, there was no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brethren, What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. For he is our brother and our flesh, and his brethren were content. Then there passed by Ishmaelite merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph to Egypt.
Okay, so we kind of see the rejection and everything there by his brothers. All right, 39, 17 to 21.
Then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, The Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in to mock me. So it happened, as I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was, when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, Your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. And then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in the prison, but the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison.
Okay, just, pretty tough situation there for Joseph. But yet, after he got in prison, the Lord was with him and blessed him. All right, the next one, chapter 40, verse 14, 15, and then 23.
Only remember me when it is well with you. Please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him.
Okay. All right, that last one there, just kind of seemed like Joseph had an opportunity to get out of prison, but somehow this guy forgot about him. All right, the next one, 41 verses 39 to 46. Who has? Was there someone that had that one? Genesis 41, 39 to 46. If not, that's fine.
I can read it.
You got it?
I can.
Go ahead.
See 39.
39 to 46.
Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Forasmuch as God has showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, put it on Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put the gold chain about his neck. And he made him to rule in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, Bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt.
Okay. Yeah, just put into authority there. The next one, 45, 3 to 11.
Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph, does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, Please come near to me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. And now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and the Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father, and say to him, Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, you and your children, your children's children, your flocks, and your herds, and all that you have. Therefore I will provide for you, lest you and your household, and all that you have come to poverty, for there are still 5 years of famine.
Okay. This story of Joseph is probably one we all know, but have you ever thought about just what happened there at the start? Joseph had these dreams or whatever, and his family kind of knew what they meant. I mean, this idea of their younger brother being the ruler over them, and obviously they didn't take too kindly to that. But like God kind of, I would say, revealed that to him a little bit, that he was gonna rule over them at some point. Did Joseph really let that affect the way he lived his life? Something to think about. The next story is the story of David, and I just kind of want to do the same thing, just kind of go through it pretty quick. I'm going to read 16, 11 to 23. Then the next one I have is 17. This is in 1 Samuel. So 1 Samuel 17, verse 50. Is there someone that would take that? Okay. 1 Samuel 23, 13 and 14. Someone that would take that? Or no? Okay. 1 Samuel 24, verses 9 to 11. Julie? 1 Samuel 26, 7 to 11. I have to think I heard you first. Go ahead, Maria. You can do that one. Alright, so 1 Samuel, first one will be 1 Samuel 16, 11 to 23. 1 Samuel 16:11 to 23. Find it here. Alright. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Are here all thy children? And he said, There remains yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said unto him, Behold now, an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. Let our Lord now command thy servants which are before thee, to seek out a man who is cunning, player on an harp. And it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit from God is on thee, that he shall play with his hand, and thou shalt be well. And Saul said unto his servants, Provide me now a man that can play well, and bring him to me. Then answered one of the servants and said, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, that is cunning in play, and a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse, and said, Send me David thy son, which is with the sheep. And Jesse took an ass laden with bread, and a bottle of wine, and a kid, and sent them by David his son unto Saul. And David came to Saul and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor-bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, Let David, I pray thee, stand before me, for he hath found favor in thy sight. And it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took an harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. Alright, this is kind of like the first time David is mentioned here. The next one is 1 Samuel 17, verse 50. You know that.
So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone. And he struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David.
Okay, God is clearly with David here, gives him sort of this victory. All right, the next one is 1 Samuel 23, 13 and 14. Who had that one?
Then David and his men, which were about 600, arose and departed out of Keilah, and went whithersoever they could go. And it was told Saul that David was escaped from Keilah, and he forbore to go forth. And David abode in the wilderness in strongholds, and remained in the mountain in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God delivered him not into his hand.
Okay. So David kind of goes from like being Saul's favorite kind of person and to being hunted by him. Okay. The next one is 1 Samuel 24, 9 to 11.
And David said to Saul, Why do you listen to the words of the men who say, Behold, David seeks your farm? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you.
Okay.
There's more. I
Yeah.
said, I will not put my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the corners of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it.
Okay. So David has an opportunity to kind of become king like he's anointed to be, but he doesn't. The next one, 26, 7 to 11. Read it.
So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and behold, Saul lay sleeping within the church, and his spear stuck in the ground, and at his bolster. But Abner and the people were round about him. Then said Abishai to David, God hath delivered thine enemy into thine hand this day. Now therefore, let me smite him, I pray thee, with the spear, even to the earth at once, and I will not smite him the second time. And David said to Abishai, Destroy him not, for who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? David said, Furthermore, as the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. But I pray thee, take thou now the spear that is at his bolster, and the cruse of water, and let us go.
thank you all for reading those references. Saved my voice just a little bit. But there's something that all three of these stories, or the two Bible characters and then the thing of making this bow, kind of all have in common. And I was actually kind of struck with it as I was thinking about what to share. It was kind of crazy how everything tied together. Joseph and David were both at an early age, were kind of given, I don't know what you want to call it. There was some direction from God that they had something in their future that was going to be a position of maybe power or leadership. And I was just thinking, this bow that we made, it had some, trees obviously don't have personality much, but there was, we kind of marked this tree before, a few months or whatever before we cut it. And, this is a special tree out of all the other trees that we wanted to use. And, and then I just, the question I'd ask, what if that tree, or what if Joseph or David had the idea of, there's something God has in mind, but that's not really what I think I want to be about. For this hickory tree, it was pretty secure in being a hickory tree. I think it had weathered some pretty cold weather. I don't know exactly how old it was when we cut it down, probably 15 or so years old. I don't know exactly. We didn't age it, but it had seen a few years of deep snow and drought, and it had like a good community around it and everything. And it was a beautiful tree, but we had something different in mind for it. What if that tree would have objected? Which it obviously couldn't really, but we as people, what if God has something in mind for us and we kind of are like, no, that's not really what I want to do. And so I think there's some lessons that we can learn. There's these three stories, and there's three lessons that I think that we can learn from here. The first one is don't get in a hurry. In thinking about this whole thing of identity, we can sometimes get our identity wrapped up in maybe even good things, what we think we need to be doing right now. But maybe God has something different in mind for us. So don't get in a hurry. And maybe he'll, in these stories, God showed David and Joseph a little sneak peek of there was going to be something down the road. What if they would have sort of tried to skip the process of, Joseph would have wanted to go straight to being a ruler over his family and stuff. What if this bow would have, we cut it down and it wants to go out and shoot some arrows the next day? That it would have like completely ruined this thing, because after pulling it back a few times, it would have just gotten completely weak and it would have been kind of useless. You think of Joseph and David, the whole story, like kind of the story of their lives. Joseph getting rejected by his brothers and thrown in the pit and sold, and all these things. God was kind of molding him and shaping his life. David didn't get straight to being king. He was in the king's palace and then sort of betrayed almost. And Saul was trying to kill him. But yet David was already anointed to be the next king. How that takes a lot of, trust that that God is going to work this all out. There was a strengthening in that process. So as we made this bow, like I said, we would stretch it, and we'd take a little bit off at a time, and we would watch how the limbs would bend as we pulled it back. We would shave a little bit off here and a little bit off there, to get everything to line up like we wanted it to. And that's kind of how David and Joseph both were as well. There's a strengthening that happens in that process, I believe. The second lesson I think we can learn from these things is to be flexible and submitted. God has the master plan for our lives, and a lot of that is stuff that we can't really see. We might get little peeks into what that might be, but God kind of has everything planned out, and He's working in our lives. Sometimes I think we can get, for me, and this message is for me, we can get focused on what we think God is wanting us to do right now, and that's great, but maybe this is actually just kind of a process to get us to something else. Yeah, if David would have tried to start being king right away, it would just probably been a lot different story. And we need to just allow God to maybe do things that we don't understand. I'm guessing this bow probably didn't want to be cut on and sanded and bent and stretched and heated and all these things. It was pretty uncomfortable, but it helped shape it into something that's pretty useful and that has a good use. And I think that's the way it is for us too. So keep an open mind to what God has for you. The third lesson that I think we can learn is just the thing of keeping our identity rooted in God. So just kind of back to this whole thing of identity. Yes, we need to be involved in different things, but is our identity rooted in God? Whether we're a plumber or a mom or a school teacher or a student or you name it. Those things are really important, and they maybe define us to a certain point, but is our identity wrapped up in God? So when one of those things is taken away, it doesn't just destroy us. If this tree, with its identity as a hickory tree, and we cut it down, if it just was like, and obviously can't do this, but if it were to just be like, well, I'm not a hickory tree anymore, so I'm just gonna rot into a little heap of nothing, well, then it would have been kind of useless. And I think that's for us too. When God has maybe something different in mind, are we willing to be like, okay, God, what do you have for me? How can I move into this new stage of life or whatever? And just the thing of, you know, we need to be flexible, but we have to have our identity rooted in God. You know, you think of like a stone cutter or something. If he has something in mind before he starts in on that rock, but if the rock would somehow take on like the qualities of Jello or something as he's trying to work with it, I mean, that would be really tough. It needs to keep that quality of rock so that the stone cutter can do this thing and make something beautiful. And I think for Joseph and David also, they kept their qualities in the middle of those tests. You know, David had the opportunity to kind of take things into his own hands and set himself up as king multiple times, but he's like, no, this isn't. He knew that the timing wasn't right and that Saul was still the king of Israel. Joseph obviously had opportunities to sort of turn his back on God and you know, in prison there he could have been like, yeah, this is sort of hopeless and how am I ever going to get out? And in those times of temptation and stuff, you know, he could have just been like, I'm far away from home. God obviously doesn't care about me anymore, and so I'm just going to do what I feel like doing. I think it's really important that we keep our identity in God through these times. So, just, I guess kind of in conclusion, that question, who are you and what are you doing here? I really like that question you asked Uncle Brian at sort of the end of the class, you know, what does commitment have to do with knowing the future? These guys, they had a little idea maybe of what was going to happen. I mean, Joseph had no idea, obviously, that he was going to end up as the ruler in Egypt. This bow had no idea what was going to happen when it got cut down. For all it knew, it could have been turned into firewood. was something that God had in mind for these two men, something that I had in mind when I started on this bit of wood. So who are you and what are you doing here? I think it's something really important to consider in our lives. Is God being able to use us like He wants to? Are we staying strong but still having those flexible qualities that He can shape and cut off and use to kind of point us to something that He has in mind? I just want to kind of close here with Psalm 139, the last verses in chapter 139 that we read. Just search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you and lead me along the path of everlasting life. You know, David had this. He had this figured out in a sense. He wasn't perfect, but he knew that that God knew everything about him and He could see everything. And so he's like, God, if there's anything in my life that's kind of in the way of you working in me, you know, point it out to me so that I can get rid of it. So that is my challenge. It's been a challenge for me too. It's hard for me sometimes to make sure that my identity is where it needs to be, and that there's not other things that can define me or whatever. And I want to just pass it on to you. So let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll maybe open up for testimonies if anybody has one or something you'd like to share. But let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for your word and for these stories that you've given us. Thank you for people that have gone before us that can just show us what it looks like to follow you and to have their identities rooted in you. Lord, I pray that we can just search our lives, and that we can open our lives up so that you can search us and point out ways that maybe we need to be, or things that we need to be getting rid of so that you can work in our lives. Please show us those things, and Lord, help us to all be faithful to you. Commit this day to you. In your name I pray.